I started noticing the shift long before he said the words that finally shattered something in me. At first, it was small comments he brushed off as jokes. He'd glance at my clothes and say I never tried the way other wives did, or that I dressed like someone who didn't understand what a high-value life required. I used to laugh it off, because for most of our marriage he'd loved that I was simple, grounded, and unaffected by trends. But somewhere along the line, admiration quietly twisted in. He started following influencers couples who traveled constantly, who posted unboxing videos of designer bags, who treated luxury like a moral achievement. He became obsessed with the idea of a better life, repeating that phrase until it became the soundtrack of our days. Every time he scrolled through his phone, I felt him comparing our ordinary moments to some staged fantasy he wanted to live inside. His wardrobe changed first. Expensive shoes, imported cologne, tailored shirts he said made him look like the men who actually go somewhere. Then he started hinting that my look didn't match his image. He asked why I didn't wear makeup more often, why I didn't present myself the way women online did. He said it lightly, but his eyes lingered too long on the flaws he suddenly noticed. One evening, after he showed me a picture of an influencer couple wearing coordinated outfits at a rooftop restaurant, he said, "You know, sometimes I feel like you're not even trying to keep up." I felt something sting, but I smiled, trying to carry peace the way I always did. I told him I didn't need labels to feel like I mattered. That's when he muttered, "Yeah, that's exactly the problem. I should have pushed back." But I didn't. I kept thinking he was stressed, or insecure, or going through some phase. I didn't see that he was slowly positioning himself above me, as if he'd evolved into something I was dragging down. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a dinner at home. I cooked one of his favorites, hoping to reconnect, hoping to remember the version of him who used to look at me like I was enough for him then. But he walked in annoyed, complaining about work, about how everyone in his office had spouses who fit their level. He said one guy's wife had just bought a designer bag that cost more than our vacation budget. He said it like it was an achievement, like a handbag somehow proved devotee. I tried to lighten the mood, but he kept pushing. He said he wanted a life that looked successful. He said people judged him based on who he was with. And then, after circling around it for weeks, he finally let the poison spill. "Let's be honest," he said, loud and sharp enough to cut through the room. I could do better. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung there, heavy and humiliating, and he didn't even flinch. He looked at me like he expected me to agree, like it was a fact, not a wound. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, staring at the man who once chose me because I made him feel grounded. Now, he wanted a fantasy partner, someone ornamental, someone who proved he'd risen above his beginnings, someone who wasn't me. That night changed something fundamental, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it, as if it had been sitting in his throat for months, waiting for the right moment to be cruel. And that was when I realized something important. He wasn't chasing a better life. He was chasing a different woman to place in it. I just didn't know yet how far he planned to go or how spectacularly that fantasy would collapse. Looking back, the shift wasn't sudden. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing down rock, barely noticeable until the structure finally buckled. In the early years, he was humble, almost self-effacing, a man who said gratitude was his currency and kindness was the only wealth he needed. I used to admire the way he thanked waiters, how he insisted on writing small notes for birthdays, how he always looked at me like he couldn't believe I had chosen him. But success has a way of magnifying the cracks a person tries to hide. When he got promoted and suddenly found himself in rooms filled with people who measured worth by watches, cars, and vacations, something inside him shifted. He started laughing too loudly at jokes told by his wealthier colleagues and repeating phrases he heard from them, as if adopting their mindset might unlock something in him. At home, the warmth he once carried so effortlessly began to thin. He'd comment on women at parties, not in the harmless way people sometimes admire beauty, but with a sharpness that told me he was taking notes. He compared me to them without saying my name, praising their hair, their shoes, their polish, like he wanted me to hear the contrast he wasn't brave enough to spell out. Even our friends noticed the way he spoke over me, the way he dismissed my opinions with a smirk that once would have embarrassed him. But the worst part wasn't the belittling, it was the indifference. He started scrolling through glamorous influencers during dinner, barely looking up, acting bored whenever I talked about my day. I began to feel invisible in my own home, like furniture he'd grown tired of, but hadn't replaced yet. I tried everything I could think of, new dishes, weekend plans, small thoughtful gestures, but every attempt slid off him like water off glass. He didn't want repair, he wanted escape, though he hadn't said it out loud yet. The more I reached toward him, the more he recoiled, as though my love was a reminder of the life he was desperate to outgrow. I kept telling myself it was stress, exhaustion, pressure, anything but what it truly was. He no longer saw me as part of his upgraded future. One night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him pacing in the hallway, whispering on the phone in that hushed tone he reserved for things he didn't want me to hear. I moved quietly toward the doorway, my heart beating too loudly for the silence around me. And that's when I heard him say it. He said he was shopping for options, like marriage was a marketplace, and I was outdated stock. The words hit me with a coldness I'd never felt before, a kind of quiet heartbreak that didn't even come with tears at first, just a numb recognition that something fundamental had broken. I stood there, frozen in the dark, listening to him laugh softly with someone who clearly knew more about the state of my marriage than I did. He listed qualities he wanted in a woman, describing a version of me that no longer existed in his mind, thinner, fleshier, more ambitious about superficial things. He talked about how he needed someone who could match his lifestyle, someone who made him look successful, someone who wouldn't embarrass him by looking too normal. I felt myself shrinking with every word, realizing he had already emotionally checked out long before I noticed the signs. But even then, standing there in the dark, I didn't fully understand the depth of the betrayal that was coming. I only knew the man I loved was preparing a life that didn't include me. And as his whispers faded, I felt the first spark of anger forming beneath the heartbreak he had caused. I should have trusted my instinct the moment he told me to dress nice for the dinner. With a tone that implied I usually didn't, I stood in front of the mirror for almost an hour, trying different combinations, wanting pathetically to avoid giving him more ammunition. I settled on a simple black dress I always loved. It wasn't new, but it fit me well, and for a moment, I felt like myself again. That feeling didn't survive the car ride. As soon as we arrived, I realized the dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a performance. The restaurant shimmered with soft gold lighting, marble floors, and people wearing brands I only recognized because he drilled them into me. He walked in like he belonged there, shoulders back, chin high, scanning the room to see who was watching. I felt him pulling away from me even as he reached for my hand, using me as a prop until he found a better spotlight. His new elite acquaintances, as he called them, were already seated 3 couples with glossy hair, perfect teeth, and jewelry that sparkled like a warning sign. The moment I sat down, one of the women looked directly at my thrift store handbag, smiled sweetly, and called it cute, the kind of cute reserved for toddlers who bring stuffed animals to dinner. Before I could respond, he laughed loudly, too loudly. The kind of laugh you use when you want to distance yourself from someone. Yeah, he said, motioning toward me as if I were an exhibit. She has this quirky attachment to bargain places. He flushed at my neck, but I forced a smile because I knew they were all watching. He didn't stop there. Throughout the night, he pointed out things I said with exaggerated corrections, interrupting me mid-sentence to steer the conversation towards something more impressive. When the men talked about high-end watches, he nudged me and said, "Don't worry, she thinks anything over $50 is expensive." When the women discussed travel, he added, "She's a homebody, tiny vacations make her nervous." I felt myself sink further into my chair, fighting the urge to disappear. But beneath the humiliation was something else, anger. It flickered slowly, building with each smirk he tossed in my direction. I kept replaying the man he used to be, the one who apologized when he spoke too quickly, the one who once told me he loved how grounded I was. Now, he treated me like a burden he couldn't shake off. The dinner reached its peak when he proudly introduced everyone at the table except me. Not a mention of my name, not a hint of who I was. Just my wife, said with the same tone someone might use for a personal assistant they were tired of. One of the women finally asked what I did for work. I opened my mouth, grateful someone cared enough to ask, but he couldn't before I could speak. She works a little office job, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Honestly, I've been telling her she should just quit. Focus on home stuff. It'd save us both a lot of embarrassment. Embarrassment. The word clanged in my head, sharp and cold. And for the first time that night, I looked directly at him instead of retreating. He didn't even notice. He was too busy listening to one of the men talk about a yacht party he wanted to attend. The rest of the dinner blurred into a haze of clinking glasses and shallow laughter. I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew nothing I said mattered to him anymore. He wasn't listening. He hadn't been listening for a long time. When we finally left, he muttered that I should really consider upgrading if I planned to join him at dinners like this, as if I was the one failing to meet expectations, as if he hadn't forgotten who I was and who we used to be. In the car, he said the words that planted the seed of everything that came after. You need to learn your place. I stared at him, stunned, the street lights flickering across his smug expression. Something inside me hardened. The humiliation had reached its limit, and humiliation, when stretched too far, turns into something sharper. He didn't notice the shift in me, not yet, but one day soon. He would regret underestimating the woman he thought wasn't enough for the fantasy life he was chasing. I wasn't expecting the attorney's call. When he asked to meet in person, his voice formal but gentle, I'd assumed it was something small. A document that needed updating or some forgotten financial detail from my father's estate. I drove to his office with a tight chest, still carrying the weight of last night's humiliation like bruises beneath my skin. My father had been gone for years. I didn't think there was anything left to discover. The attorney greeted me with the kind of somber warmth people reserve for news they know will land heavily. He sat across from me, clasped his hands, and slid a folder across the table. Your father, he said, was a planner, and he left something for you that activates this year. I opened the folder expecting something modest. A bond, a piece of land, maybe a handful of stocks. Instead, the words blurred for a moment as I scanned the pages. Majority shareholder, trust authority, full discretionary control, estimated value for $0.8 million. I blinked, then blinked again. My father, the same man who taught me to value simplicity, who told me that wealth meant responsibility, not display, had quietly placed me at the helm of a construction and investment company he'd built with partners decades ago. He'd hidden it, not out of secrecy, but out of protection. You were too young when he passed, the attorney explained. He wanted you to learn who people are when they think you have nothing to offer. Those words hit harder than anything my husband had said in months. I sat there absorbing it all, the numbers, the shares, the trust, the slow unfolding of a reality I never imagined. For the first time in a long time, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, not in fear, but in unexpected strength. It wasn't about the money. It was the validation. Someone had believed in me enough to entrust me with something monumental. Someone had seen what my husband refused to look at. When I drove home, I didn't tell him. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through luxury travel accounts, absorbed in fantasies of yachts and curated lifestyles. He barely acknowledged me when I walked in. We're going to that gala next month, he said without looking up. Trying not to wear anything embarrassing, I stood there silently, watching the man who thought he held all the power in our marriage. A man who couldn't imagine I might have a world outside the one he controlled. I realized then how easy it was going to be, letting him believe his own delusion while I quietly stepped into a future he had no access to. Over the next few days, I started planning. Slowly, quietly, carefully, I read through trust documents late at night when he was asleep, highlighting details, taking notes, understanding exactly what I was stepping into. I researched the company, learned the names of board members, identified the leadership team. Every page I read built a different version of myself, one with options, security, choices he didn't know I possessed. He continued his snide remarks, his corrections, his little cutting comments that once pierced me, but now they hit something harder. Something he couldn't dent anymore. Every verbal jab reminded me why the secrecy mattered. Every laugh at my expense made my resolve sharper. He had spent months making me feel small, powerless, dependent, and he believed it. That belief was my greatest weapon. I remember one night he glanced at my thrift store handbag again and said, "You know, if you're going to be around the people I want to associate with, you need to step up your image." I smelled, not bitterly, but almost tenderly, because for the first time I saw him clearly. He wasn't a villain. He was a man starving for validation, blind to anything that didn't glitter, a man who measured worth with receipts and logos, a man who would never understand the phrase my father left in his letter at the back of the folder. True wealth reveals character. It doesn't create it. As I folded the letter and slipped it into my drawer that night, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. Let him play his role. Let him believe he was ascending while I was being dragged behind him. Because when the truth came, when the trust officially transferred into my hands, the power dynamic would flip so thoroughly that he wouldn't know what hit him. And I planned to walk away with every ounce of dignity he thought he'd stripped from me. His ego didn't just grow after that business deal. It inflated like someone had hooked a pump directly into his pride and forgot to turn it off. It wasn't even a particularly large deal, just a temporary contract bonus. But he strutted through the house as if he'd just been crowned CEO of some global empire. Suddenly, every conversation began with "when I'm a millionaire," as though he were already halfway there, and I was expected to nod along like a supportive accessory. The morning after he received the payment, he announced over breakfast that he wanted to upgrade our lifestyle. He said it with a rehearsed confidence, like he'd practiced that line in the mirror. "I'm thinking a new car," he added, scrolling through images of luxury vehicles he definitely couldn't afford. Something that reflects where we're headed, where he was headed. Apparently, I watched him tap through pictures of glassy dashboards and engines he didn't understand. "We can't afford that," I reminded him gently, but he waved me off, calling me negative and accusing me of lacking ambition. "You think too small," he said. "People who live large become large. It's mindset." Mindset didn't change bank accounts. But he wasn't listening. Within days, he was visiting dealerships, taking photos beside cars he had no intention of buying, or no ability to buy, and posting them online with captions like "big moves coming." He started hosting these ridiculous networking gatherings in our living room, inviting people he barely knew, people who were one luxury watch away from bankruptcy themselves. They swaggered in with loud voices and louder colognes, each trying to outbrag the other. He made me serve snacks. During one of those nights, he bragged about how his future income would allow him to travel first class. Someone asked what I did for work, and before I could answer, he cut in with, "She's taking some time to figure things out," as if my career embarrassed him, as if I should have disappeared so he could look more eligible. And then there was her, the woman he insisted was just connections, though his eyes followed her in a way that made my stomach twist. She was polished, wealthy, all money, elegant, with a laugh that tinkled like she'd practiced it in a ballroom. He hovered near her all evening, complimenting her jewelry, her perfume, even the way she held her wine glass. I was sitting right there, invisible. Later, When I confronted him gently, he shrugged. Relax, she's part of a higher circle. Being around people like her is good for my brand. His brand. Not our marriage, not our life. His brand. Everything he did now seemed like a simulation of a single wealthy man preparing for a new life, one where I didn't exist. He started staying out later, dressing sharper, obsessing over skincare routines he'd mocked me for. He'd angle his jaw in the mirror, lift his chin, and practice looking important. He filmed himself giving fake business advice. He started talking about leveling up his romantic image, whatever that meant. Meanwhile, I moved through the house like a ghost, watching the man I married morph into an exaggerated version of himself. The attention from wealthier people fed him like oxygen. Every compliment made him crueler at home. Every event invitation inflated his entitlement. And every time he flirted openly, even in front of me, he treated it like harmless practice for the life he believed was waiting. I told myself to stay calm, that the trust would transfer soon, that time was on my side. But nothing prepared me for the moment everything crystallized. One night, he left his phone unlocked on the countertop while he showered. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't searching. But when the screen lit up with a message preview, the words practically dragged my eyes toward them. Once I upgrade my life, she'll understand. My hand froze above the device. The room went still. The message was from the same wealthy woman he'd hovered around, her name sitting there like a smug little stain across the screen. There was a longer thread when I tapped the notification. Photos of wine bars, compliments he'd sent her, long paragraphs about how he deserved more, deserved better, deserved a partner who matched his image. But it was that one line that kept echoing. Once I upgrade my life, she'll understand. He wasn't planning a future with me. He was planning an escape from me. And he thought I was the weak link he'd soon outgrow. I put the phone down carefully, quietly, like it might explode, because he had no idea, not even the faintest hint, that I was the one about to outgrow him. When he first heard that I'd inherited something from my father, he didn't even pretend to be supportive. He didn't ask how I felt, didn't ask what it meant to me, didn't even bother pretending to care about the emotional weight of it. He just stood in the doorway with this sharp, excited glint in his eyes, like he'd been waiting for an opportunity to pounce. So, he said, crossing his arms, "How much are we talking?" "Enough to finally start living the way we're meant to." I kept my voice calm. "It's not for spending. It's something my dad set aside for me." He scoffed. "For us? You mean? Come on. Don't be naive. I'm the only one who knows how to multiply money. Just hand it over. I can turn it into something real." He said it like it was obvious, like the moment he asked, I was supposed to obey, like my father's legacy belonged to him. I repeated myself quietly. "No." He blinked, confused at first, as if he couldn't process the idea of me denying him anything. Then confusion hardened into irritation. "Don't start with that stubborn nonsense. You know I'm better at this than you. Give it to me, and I'll use it to take us to the next level." I shook my head. "It's mine. My father intended it for me." And that's when something snapped in him. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but sharpening every word. "You're holding me back. Do you get that? I'm trying to build a better life, and you're sitting here clutching pennies like some scared little girl. It's pathetic." I felt the insult hit like a slap, but I stayed still. I'd learned recently that my silence enraged him more than anything. He kept going. "All these years, I've carried us. I've made the connections. I've built the image. And what do you contribute? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." His voice rose, angry enough that the picture frames on the wall seemed to tremble. "You should be grateful I'm even giving you a chance to be part of the life I deserve." He said, "I" again. Never we, never us, always him at the center. The sun he believed the world revolved around. When I didn't respond, he exploded. "God, you're such a burden. Do you know how embarrassing it is dragging you around? Do you know what people say? They wonder why I settled. They wonder why I'm still wasting time on someone so basic. The word lodged deep, sharp and familiar, but this time, it didn't break me the way it used to. It just made something inside me go cold. He paced, breathing hard, whipping his hand through his hair like he needed the room to witness his suffering. Then he stopped and looked right at me. Let's be honest. I can do better. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. Hearing it again, spoken so plainly, so confidently, cracked something open inside me. Not a wound, not a collapse. Something quieter, a stillness that felt like the final moment before a storm starts rearranging the world. For the first time, I truly saw our marriage for what it had become, a stage where he performed his fantasies and expected me to play the supporting role. My feelings didn't matter. My boundaries didn't matter. My father's memory didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was his hunger. And in that moment, standing there while he tore me down with the same words he used to build himself up, I hit rock bottom. But rock bottom has a strange power, because once you reach it, there's nothing left to fear, nothing left to lose, nothing left to protect except the part of yourself you refuse to let die. He didn't know it yet, but while he thought he was breaking me, he was actually freeing me. After that night, I realized that words alone wouldn't protect me. I needed a plan, but it had to be invisible, like water carving its path underground. I started meeting with lawyers, trustees, and financial advisors quietly, always during hours when he was at work or lost in his fantasy life. I asked questions, took notes, and absorbed every detail about the trust, the company, and my rights. Each meeting made me feel a little lighter, like the weight he had placed on me for years was finally shifting. Signing the documents transferring the trust fully into my name was surreal. I sat in the quiet office, pen in hand, reading the final clauses again and again. Every signature, every initial, was a small reclamation of power, a silent declaration that I would no longer be someone else's appendage. I couldn't tell him, not yet. Letting him think he was still in control made the eventual reveal even sweeter. I rented a small apartment under an LLC, a name he wouldn't recognize, and began moving personal belongings in small, careful batches. Nothing flashy, nothing noticeable, but enough to create a new space for myself, a sanctuary where I could think, plan, and breathe. Every bag I packed, every item I touched, reinforced the truth I kept hidden from him. I was building a life beyond his grasp. At home, I stopped arguing, stopped defending myself, stopped reacting to his taunts. He continued his smug remarks, unaware that my silence was not submission, but strategy. He believed I was defeated, fragile, and still dependent. In truth, I was calculating every move, measuring every moment, waiting for the perfect timing to step fully into my own life. It was strange, this quiet double life. By day, I remained the wife he dismissed, meek and compliant. By night, I was the architect of my independence, the person who knew exactly how the next chapters would unfold. The contrast between his perception and my reality made every insult sting less and every planning session feel sharper, more precise. For the first time in years, I slept without fear. Not because I had power yet, but because I had foresight, I had preparation, and in that quiet, I could feel the storm building. Not for him, not yet, but for the moment when the fantasy he lived in would collide with the truth I was quietly crafting. The morning he announced his trial separation felt almost like theater. He stood in the middle of the living room, hands on his hips, chest puffed as if the air itself owed him attention. "I think we both need space," he said, voice dripping with that practiced charm he thought could excuse months of cruelty. "It's generous of me. Really, I'm doing this for both our sakes." I watched him pack his bags, each full of clothing exaggerated, each suitcase handled like a trophy. He talked about staying with friends who understood what it meant to live the right way, about the networking dinners he'd attend, about trips he was planning that I would never be invited to. He framed his exit like a gift, a stepping stone, a kind act that I was supposed to appreciate. As he zipped the last bag, he glanced at me and smirked. One day, you'll thank me. I'm just leveling us up. You'll see, it's for the best. I stared at him, calm and quiet. Okay, I said, simply letting the word hang in the air. His smirk faltered for just a fraction. He wasn't used to resistance, not in the form of serene acceptance. He expected anger, tears, maybe begging. Instead, I offered nothing but clarity. He left the house carrying his illusions, proud and self-satisfied. The door closed behind him, and for the first time in years, I smelled, small, quiet, and real. For the first time, I felt that the air around me wasn't weighted with his contempt. It was mine. The first day I officially took control of the trust, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. Walking into the boardroom, I carried no pretenses, no desire to perform like my husband had with his staged luxury. I introduced myself simply, firmly, and clearly. I was now the majority shareholder, the one with the final say. The executives looked up from their laptops, initially polite, but skeptical, as though they expected some timid, unprepared heir to stumble through her first meeting. I listened first, absorbing names, responsibilities, ongoing projects, and the subtle undercurrents of office politics. I asked questions, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to understand the company as he would never have bothered to. Every time I spoke, I noticed heads lifting, eyes meeting mine with attention and respect, the kind that comes not from fear, but from genuine recognition. As weeks passed, I learned the rhythm of the business, mustering reports, analyzing investments, negotiating contracts. The confidence I had hidden for so long surfaced. Strengthened by competence and independence, I realized something profound. My father had prepared this for me all along. His trust wasn't just financial, it was a blueprint for self-assurance, a reminder that I was capable of far more than anyone, including my husband, had believed. Executives who had once casually dismissed my presence now deferred to me, asking for my opinion, valuing my decisions. Meetings that used to feel intimidating became arenas where I flourished. I began making strategic changes, subtle and meaningful, enhancing productivity and morale. Each decision, each acknowledgement, was a quiet reminder of power reclaimed. The contrast with my husband's world could not have been sharper. While he flitted from one Fox luxury event to another, obsessed with image and approval, I was building something tangible, something real. No one laughed at me, no one doubted my worth, and no one attempted to diminish me. It was the first time in years I experienced the thrill of being fully seen, fully respected, and fully capable. This was my first true power reversal. The man who had mocked me, belittled me, and claimed he could do better now had no idea the life I was quietly building, or the confidence I was cultivating with each passing day. While he practiced wealth as a costume, I wielded it as substance, and the difference was unmistakable. While I was quietly ascending, he was tumbling. His carefully constructed world of luxury and status began to reveal its cracks, and the first signs came almost immediately. The friends he had paraded around, the ones he bragged about to me endlessly, had only been interested in appearances. Invitations vanished, messages went unanswered, and the polite smiles that once fed his ego turned into polite distance. They had never respected him. They had only tolerated him for the fantasy he projected, the wealthy woman he flirted with, the one he claimed was just a connection, discovered the truth faster than he anticipated. She realized he wasn't running a business empire, wasn't investing in anything meaningful, and certainly wasn't financially secure. Overnight, the flirtations and carefully timed compliments evaporated, leaving him staring at empty inboxes and unanswered texts. Meanwhile, reality hit hard and fast. Bills that he had assumed could be deferred came due, and his accounts didn't have the cushion he had bragged about. The luxury car he had pretended to own was repossessed after missed payments, a humiliating confirmation that his image was built entirely on pretense. The upscale apartment he had rented under his name was locked out. The keys confiscated when the landlord discovered his credit issues. And then came the texts to me. At first, they were casual, small attempts to reconnect. "Hey, hope you're okay," or "missing you soon." The tone shifted, layered with forced affection and nostalgia. "I never meant to hurt you," one message read, as if months of ridicule, belittlement, and betrayal could be undone with a few digital words. Another, "Can we talk? I've realized what really matters." I read each one, carefully, quietly, a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction swelling inside me. He had spent years underestimating me, and now he was reaching out to the woman he had dismissed, the one he had tried to keep small. His charm had failed. His fantasy had failed, and I was no longer just invisible, I was untouchable. Every failed plan, every collapsed scheme, every rejection from the people he had so desperately tried to impress was a small victory I savored in silence. I didn't respond. I didn't gloat. I simply watched the man who had believed he could do better crumble under the weight of the life he had built on illusion. And the best part, he had no idea that while he was struggling to survive the fantasy, I was thriving in reality. I agreed to meet him for dinner, though every fiber of my being buzzed with anticipation for the moment I would reclaim my dignity. The restaurant was the same one where he had mocked me months ago, where his laughter had felt like a weight pressing me into the floor. I arrived in a chauffeur-driven car, the hum of the engine beneath me a small thrill of control. My outfit was tailored, precise, elegant without being ostentatious. The kind of look that whispered refinement without needing approval. I stepped inside, calm, collected, carrying an air he had never learned to respect. He was already seated at the table, leaning back, chest out, smirk in place, as if the months of chaos had done nothing to humble him. He stood when he saw me, eyes glinting with the smug expectation that I would melt under the sight of him. "You look good," he said. The pause loaded with the undertone of judgment. I smiled faintly, sliding into my seat, letting the silence stretch. The waiter appeared, and I ordered with quiet confidence, my tone measured, deliberate. He launched into his routine almost immediately, recounting his misadventures, the extravagant parties he'd attended, the women he'd impressed, all attempts to perform the fantasy he'd built. Then came the line I had been waiting for. He leaned across the table, casual, arrogant, as if our entire history hadn't been a battlefield. "Maybe we could try again," he said, smirking. "You know, start over. Things could be different." I nodded slowly, letting the words hang, savoring the way his expectation of compliance hovered in the air. Then, with deliberate calm, I picked up my phone and opened the company's digital dashboard. My fingers moved confidently, signing off on a routine transaction, an acquisition, simple in action, monumental in meaning. The staff had already been instructed to address me formally, and as the waiter returned, he greeted me with respect. Bowing slightly, "Ms. Name, the owner," the words landed like bricks in the middle of his smug grin. His eyes widened, the smirk faltering, then crumpling. I watched, quietly, as the realization struck him fully. The woman he had mocked, dismissed, and assumed was powerless, was now not just wealthy, she was controlling an empire he could only dream of. The trust, the shares, the investments, the quiet months of preparation, all of it converged in this single moment. He opened his mouth, probably to reclaim dominance, to reclaim some shred of illusion. But the words didn't come. His entire posture shifted, the arrogance draining out of him like water from a bucket. He had spent years fantasizing about the glamorous life he thought he deserved, measuring himself against strangers and influencers. But here I was, effortlessly embodying the success he had pretended to achieve. I sipped my wine, serene, letting him sit in the realization that he had lost, utterly and completely, the weight of his previous taunts. The years of belittlement and the arrogance of his better life dissolved into silence as he absorbed the truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Power spoke louder than words, and in that quiet, measured moment, it screamed, He shifted in his seat, stammering for composure. But even the practiced charm that had once held sway over our social circles faltered. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the twitch in his hand, the way his eyes darted toward the staff who now addressed me with authority. Everything he had sought through imitation, through arrogance, through shallow connections, had been outpaced by a calm, patient, and deliberate reality he had ignored. I smiled faintly, letting the satisfaction settle in, letting him stew in the shock of the reveal. The empire my father had left me, the quiet months of preparation, the careful accumulation of knowledge and authority, all had led to this single, irreversible moment. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't someone to be humiliated. I was the owner, the decision maker, the one who finally held the power he had always craved. And as he sat there, face collapsing under the weight of my quiet triumph, I felt a clarity I had never known before. The fantasy he built was never real, but my reality was unstoppable. He tried to speak, stumbling over words as his arrogance faltered into panic. "Wait, he began, but his voice cracked, betraying the confidence he had worn like armor for so long. He gestured toward the staff, the other diners, even me, as if he could command the world to believe the illusion he had spent months constructing. But the restaurant had already turned into my stage, and everyone present was witnessing his unraveling. I leaned back slightly, calm and deliberate, letting the tension build. "You really believed you could keep underestimating me," I said, voice quiet but cutting. "You thought I was weak, invisible, nothing. You mocked my thrift store bags, my choices, my life. And while you were busy practicing a fantasy, I was building reality." He opened his mouth again, desperate, flailing for an excuse, but I continued. "You traded love for greed. You belittled me in front of friends, family, strangers. And now, after everything, you're realizing the truth." The realization hit him like a punch. His shoulders slumped, his carefully curated ego crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Every glance from the restaurant staff, every polite nod from the diners, reinforced the truth he had never wanted to see. No one admired him here. No one respected him. Everyone recognized the person who had quietly claimed her power. I reached into my bag, pulling out the trust account card that he had once sneered at. The pathetic card, he'd called it, and slid it across the table. The staff accepted it without question, ringing up the bill with efficiency and precision. I paid for the dinner. Every penny, every transaction a symbolic reversal of the life he had tried to stage. He stared, mouth half open, as the other diners' eyes flecked between us. Some recognized me from business meetings, news, or social circles I had entered quietly and competently. His elite friends were there too, witnessing the collapse of the image he had worked so hard to maintain. Their polite smiles dissolved into awkward glances as they realized he was no longer the man he pretended to be. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, finally, letting each word land deliberately. "You will receive nothing. Everything you thought defined you, the connections, the money, the influence, meant nothing without integrity, respect, or humility. You chose to betray love for illusion, and now you live in the consequences." His hand shook, his composure gone, as if the room itself were condemning him. I watched, quiet, as the man who once declared he could do better realized that he had nothing to offer the life he dreamed of. And in that moment, I felt the second power reversal settle fully around me. The humiliator humiliated, the overconfident spouse undone, the world witnessing the truth that had been mine all along. The fantasy he had clung to crumbled in public, and I, calm and composed, held every shard in my hands, untouched and unshakable, sitting in my new apartment, the city lights stretching below me like a river of possibility. I finally allowed myself to breathe fully. For months, maybe even years, I had carried the weight of his criticisms, his mockery, his constant reminders that I was not enough. Each insult had chipped at me. Each dismissal had felt like a confirmation that my value depended on someone else's approval. But standing here now, overlooking a skyline I had earned the right to enjoy. I realized that the only approval that ever mattered was my own. The apartment wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. It wasn't a trophy for anyone else to admire. And it wasn't a prize to flaunt. Every piece of furniture, every careful decision in decor reflected me, my taste, my priorities, my independence. It was a physical manifestation of the quiet power I had built while he chased illusions. I smiled at the thought that he would never understand the depth of this satisfaction, the kind that comes not from wealth itself, but from the knowledge that you earned it on your own terms. I thought back to the nights of humiliation, the dinners where he mocked my choices, the moments when I questioned my worth. Each of them had felt like the end of the world at the time, and yet, each of those moments had pushed me closer to the clarity I now held. Heartbreak had been my teacher, patience my ally, and preparation my weapon. The anger that had once burned so hot inside me had transformed into focus, strategy, and eventually, liberation. I took a deep breath, filling the city air mix with the quiet echo of my own heartbeat. Resilience, I realized, wasn't about matching someone else's expectations. It was about defining your own. Dignity wasn't given. It was claimed, often in silence, in the moments when no one is watching. And the most profound lesson of all, never let anyone else assign value to your existence. The life I now led was proof, not of revenge in its shallow form, not of proving him wrong for the sake of spectacle, but of reclaiming the most important thing of all, myself, my independence, my voice, my worth, all untethered from the judgments and desires of a man who had believed he could outshine me. I leaned back in my chair, the lights of the city reflecting in my eyes, and smiled quietly to myself. The narrative that had once trapped me was rewritten, not with noise or spectacle, but with careful, deliberate patience. Every step, every secret preparation, every calm decision had led to this, freedom in its purest, most satisfying form. And as I sipped my tea, letting the quiet evening envelop me, I whispered to no one but myself. Turns out, I wasn't the one who needed an upgrade.